Alright, we are back with Terrain Tuesday, and we're going to continue working on the Fallout bus, which currently looks like a giant taped off mess. It's just because we're going to go ahead and do airbrush for the yellow. I'm actually using yellow ochre, which is a slightly orangey brownish yellow, so that should kind of match the dingy appearance of the in-game buses. As you can see, I've taken painter's tape and masked off the areas. I've also applied water and then put salt onto some patches to have a bit of weathering going on. Also, for any of the more rounded parts, I like to use silly putty as a masking medium. It's really easy. You can go in with just a sculpting tool, and it works really well for keeping as a masking medium. It's kind of my go-to for a lot of stuff, but so we're going to go ahead, and you can see it's all done on the back as well. So we're just going to go ahead and airbrush this all on and see how it looks. Alright, so I had to switch over to this orange rust from my yellow ochre. The yellow ochre is gumming up the airbrush something fierce. So I just switched over so we have a slightly more orange look. But once I go over it with some of the weathering, so what we're going to do is very carefully peel this off. Now, I did make sure, prior to masking and everything, to seal the model. This is so that it would prevent, or at least try to prevent, any of the masking material from pulling off paint. Also, it would help with the salt weathering some. So let's go ahead and just peel all this off and see what we got. Alright, so next we're going to go ahead and remove the salt that we are using for some weathering. So we're just taking a stiff brush and just flaking it away. Alright, so there we can see the salt reveals the undercoat very nicely. The masking with the tape and the silly putty worked well, especially on these rounded edges. Now we will of course apply additional rust colors to these patches, but this gives us great starting point. Now the next part is we're going to mask off the front wheel well here using some silly putty, and then I will paint that with the airbrush as well. So I'm going to do that, apply the rust, and then we'll come back to go ahead and finish up with the weathering of the rest of this. Alright, so we've done the front wheel wells. The backs don't get colored, they're just there as they are. So now we're going to start applying a bit of rust wash in patches. So I've got my Vallejo rust effect, just the standard color. I'm just taking a bit of paper towel, saturating it a bit, And then we're just going to dab it. I'm going to pay special attention to where I've got the metal showing through there. Kind of get that color changed. Alright, so while that dries, we're going to go ahead and also paint the seats. So we're going to go with a dark gray on that, because eventually we're going to brown wash pretty much the whole thing to really give it that weathered effect. We're also going to pick out certain details. So we're going to pick out the lights, all of these, and the tires themselves, and just start getting those colors put in. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll be back to review it and apply the earth shade. Okay, so I've gone ahead and applied a dark gray to the seats so that when the brown wash is applied, they'll darken up and it should work well. I've hit some of the gauges with a blue. The lights I did metallic and then did contrast red and yellow over those to give them a bit of color but still have the metallic behind the lens feel. I did the same in the front. I've also hit the edging of the windows with a bit of white. So we are now set to go ahead and apply our earth shade. And I'm just going to be applying it from the top down just to give it kind of a overall appearance. So I'm going to use one of my larger brushes. It's normally a dry brush, but it also works good for applying washes in this situation. It is nice and large to get as much of it on as possible. This could be pretty messy. My fingers will probably wind up covered in this stuff, and I'll use way too much of this, so a cheaper alternative is just to make your own brown wash using cheap acrylic and water. But as long as I've got this, I'm just going to go ahead and use it. Alright, so that's really dingied it up, which is exactly what we wanted. Now, I did forget one thing, and that's to put the red stripe along the edge. What I'm going to do for that, actually, is to go ahead and use my contrast paint to keep the shade that I've already kind of applied, as opposed to using regular paint, which would override it. The contrast will actually kind of allow the shade to go through. So all I'm going to do is take a very careful lining down the edge here. Alright, so actually that lining came out really good, and I think adding it after the fact worked well with using the contrast. It definitely seems to have balanced it nicely. So I'm going to let all of this dry, and then we'll hit a couple more detail spots, like we're going to mess around with the mirror a bit, and we'll get it sealed, but it's looking good as is. As you can see, nice and Fallouty. So we'll let it dry and come back for some more. So we are pretty much done at this point. I went ahead and weathered the roof. I've done the steering wheel, console pieces, added details on the lights back here, even a license plate. Same on the front. And then I took a silver to the mirrors. So they're all done. And I did apply some more dark rust over it. So overall, I'm super happy with this. I think it's a really good representation of it in game. It's also a really nice size. So I'm going to seal it and we'll be done. So for our next project, I think I'm going to go ahead and start printing out one of the pick-her-up trucks that came with this same bundle, since I don't have one of those yet. So we'll take it from the included files, printing, painting, just like we did the bus. But that'll be on the next Terrain Tuesday, which will be after our next Marvel. So, thank you everyone, and we'll talk to everyone later.